Today, we are going to explore the topic of modularization. So, what is modularization? Modularization is actually a technique which is used to break down complex problems into smaller, more understandable units. Consider a factory where we build cars. Now, in order to make this complex process of building cars into more smaller, manageable processes, we can divide that assembly line into multiple assembly lines. Let's just say we have this assembly line, which is, as a whole, we can think of it as it builds car, right? So that we input parts here and the output is the car. Now, obviously, building a car is a much more complex process. We can make it modularize and we can make it easier by dividing this process into more smaller, manageable chunks. So, for example, we have an assembly line inside, which is for building engine. We have another assembly line, which is for building the body. And yet we have a third assembly line, which is probably, let's call it build interior part or components, right? So somebody who's working on building the engine doesn't need to worry about how the body is built. He doesn't need to know about how the interior components are built. He only needs to focus on building an engine. Now, in turn, this building an engine could also be a complex process, so we can further divide it into smaller processes inside it. So for example, over here, we can have multiple assembly lines which build different parts of the engine, right? Could be building the pistons or building the camshaft and things like that. But at the end, what this process outputs is an engine for the car, right? What this process or assembly line outputs, it gives us the body of the car. And this is the interior, right? We can combine these together in order to give us the actual car. So this is a process of modularization. We are changing this complex process of building a car into more smaller components so that people who are working on those components only need to focus on those smaller components and do not need to worry about how other parts of the system are built. Similarly, in the world of programming, consider you have a program which has 1,000 lines. Up to 1,000 lines of code, or let's say 10,000 lines of code. Now, in order to understand what this program does, you have to start at line number 1, understand what this does, go to line 2 and so forth, right? So sequentially, you have to read from start to bottom and understand what the program does. Now, this is extremely difficult, right? This is 10,000 lines of code, but more complex programs have millions of lines of code. So what do we do in that case? No one can actually go and read through all 1 million lines of code and be able to understand what they do, because by the time you pass like 100, 150 lines, you already forgot what's happening in the previous lines. So how do we solve this problem? Again, modularization comes to the rescue, right? So dividing this 10,000 lines of code into more smaller units, more manageable units, using techniques of modularization, we can create this program into easily understandable program. And this process is called modularization. Now, in the world of programming, let's say we change this program of 10,000 lines of code into 100 lines of code chunks, right? So we will have smaller units. Each unit will comprise of 100 lines of code. Now, these units in the world of programming are sometimes called methods. Sometimes they're called functions. Sometimes they're referred to as subroutines. And in some programming languages, they also refer to them as procedures. There are other ways to modularize programs, also complex programs. So what we have seen so far is we have a single program, single file maybe, we are modularizing that into smaller components within that file itself. There are other ways to modularize the program as well at a much more higher level, and we will study in our following lectures, for example, in object-oriented programming, how to modularize bigger parts of the program and so forth. In this lecture, we will focus on how to modularize parts of a program in a single file. If we think hard enough, we will understand that it is extremely important for a program to be modular, because it will not only allow us to understand the program easily, it will also make it more reusable. Program reusability is another very important piece of modularization. So for example, if you have to build another model of the car or another body style, you have to change this assembly line, right, for the build body. However, if you want to use the same engine, you don't have to make any changes here. You can continue to use the build engine assembly line, and at the end, when you have the engine and the body, you just combine them together. So you are reusing this build engine assembly line in this case. Similarly, in our programs, when we change it into modules, those modules can be easily reused. That's a very big advantage when it comes to modularization in programming languages. This also helps that, let's say, if some other programmer has written a library or a function or a module to do certain things, you don't have to rewrite those things. You can just import those modules into your program and be able to use it. You don't have to know how that module is implemented. All you know is it provides some functionality, and you use that functionality in your program.